Hello and welcome to the You Deserve More show. My name is Barbara Stanten and I'm the host. And today we have with us Bex Burton. Welcome, Bex.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everybody out there.
I'm so excited to hear some of your stories and to hear how you coach. And I'm going to just read your bio and let the audience get to know you a little bit. So Bex Burton, trauma-informed certified life coach, helps independent women attract and grow lasting love. That's what we're all about here, without sacrificing who they are or what they want out of life. After painfully hitting the same walls in love over a decade, Bex committed to the study and growth of lasting love. Today, she enjoys a deeply connected partnership of 11 years with the man of her dreams. Through her signature program, Your Majesty and Core Joy Living, she helps other independent women do the very same, attract and grow equal, healthy relationships. Wait, are you me?
I think we share a similar story. I think
We
many of
share
us
similar
do.
stories, especially about your history of struggling and stumbling and then becoming an expert in the field because you were so passionate about figuring it out. So can you share with us what how you work and why your method is successful?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So how I work, my area of focus, I help independent women, people-pleasing women attract and grow equal healthy relationships so that they can hold on to their sovereignty, their autonomy in the container of partnership. So a lot of independent women, and myself included, have rejected love in the past because they've gotten into relationship and they have sacrificed elements of themselves, exiled the very best parts of themselves until one day they look in the mirror and they realize, where did I go? What happened to me? What happened to the very best parts of me? And this is very common, and this is the history that I had in relationship. I, grew up in a family of origin system that did not acknowledge my emotions and my needs, and a lot of those things were supplied for me. And so, as we all do, we carry the frameworks that we were programmed in early childhood into our adult relationships. And after 3 long-term relationships over the course of a decade, coming to this very same place of, where did I go? I don't know who I am in this relationship. Not having any skills, I'd flip the table and walk out of the restaurant, as I like to say. Just ending the relationship without any kind of communication or any kind of collaboration. I recognized that after the 3rd time that happened in 10 years, that I was the common denominator. And so began a journey of mine to study love and to become a perpetual student of love. And it was many years later, after I had met the man who's now my husband, that I chose to offer the skills and the tools and the practices that I adopted to other women who out there who are in very similar patterns. So the work that I do today, I have 2 programs, Core Joy Living, which is for partnered women who are kind of nearing that place where they feel like they've abandoned themselves, as well as Your Majesty, which is the program that I have that invites single women to elevate to their very best, most magnetic and attractive selves. And I work in sort of similar ways in both of those programs, which is deepening the connection that we have with ourselves. For many people-pleasing women who are very ready to pay attention and care to others' needs, we often sacrifice our own needs. And very often we're not even aware of what our own needs are. We're disconnected from our emotional experience. So the work that I do at the most foundational level is to help women really form a deep and lasting connection with themselves, with their emotional experience, with their needs, both needs met and needs unmet, so that they can develop skillful communication and be in true partnership with the people that they love, whether that be new partners that they're calling in or the established partners that they have created a life with.
Wow, that's amazing. I love Your Majesty. My course is called Queen School, so it's so resonant with the. I think we teach similar things, so I love that. Your Majesty is a great term. Um, I love that you share that you took radical responsibility for your patterns, and I'm sure you really offer that to your clients as well, to really just like, no, like you are the common denominator. It wasn't him. I mean,
Mhm.
maybe it was, but it's irrelevant, right? So to look at your own patterns and to really only work with your side of the street, that's all you can do. And so
Mhm.
can you share with our audience what would be a really good way to recognize your patterns and to start shifting them, to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So, I mean, one of the biggest things is to reflect on our history, and I call it hindsight reflection. And the key to this is to approach this practice with loving compassion, compassion for self, compassion for the other parties involved, because there is no changing what was, what is. That's another approach that I take in the work that I do is radical acceptance and being present with what is. Um, so, compassionately reflecting back on our history and noticing, at the surface, are there similarities in the partners that I've chosen? Are there similarities in the longing or discontent that I experienced in those partnerships? So we're looking for sort of the golden thread that carries throughout various different relationships. And if we haven't had a number of different relationships to mine for information,
Right.
then we can look at our we can look at other influential relationships, particularly if we're talking about heterosexual relationships between men and women. We can look at the family of origin, who is the primary male figure in that family of origin. There's a relationship there that can be explored. So it doesn't have to be a reflection on our romantic relationships alone. Um, but there's so much to be gleaned from our past experiences that that's always where we start. In the work that I do, I have an exercise that's called a walk through time, where we identify at least like 3 to 5 major male influences in our life, whether they be romantic partnerships, again, our primary male caretaker growing up, or even, a male mentor or a teacher or some other person of influence in our life that we felt a connection, that we felt a bond with. Because chances are, our patterns are going to show up in those relationships just as much as our romantic relationships.
Right. Right. Okay. So I love that you covered not just romantic relationships, because there are women that are going to be watching this that have never had a relationship, and they're like, wow, why am I now 42 and I still never had a relationship or a marriage, and so that's an option to look at the patterns of what you were modeled before, depending on who your role
Mhm.
models were. Amazing.
Yeah. And
So
even further, just to add on to that, these patterns will also show up in our friendships. It doesn't necessarily have to be a male female dynamic. I think that those that our patterns show up the most strongest in those dichotomies.
right.
But we can show people pleasing tendencies and the prioritization of other people's needs even in our friendships with other women.
Right. So let's dive into people pleasing. Like, it can be very covert. Like it can be very like, oh, I'm not doing that for them, but you kind of, you're never doing it for the other person, really. You're doing it for your own selfishness, actually. And I always call that out, because when you're over giving, it's to get something. And right. And it can feel really like, no, I'm truly from my heart giving this. Can you just dive a little bit into that kind of insidious little bad, pattern that we can have as people pleasers?
Of course, absolutely. People pleasing women, we're just trying to help. We're just trying to help or alleviate another person's disappointment, discomfort, or inconvenience. And what you're talking about is absolutely on point, where what is happening subconsciously is that what we're trying to gain out of that situation is control. We're trying to control the other person's reaction by giving them what we think that they want. So an example of this, many years ago, this is sort of like a wake-up call. I was in very early in my marriage with my husband, my relationship with my husband even. And he used to travel very often for work. And we after we moved, we lived about 45 minutes, an hour away from the airport. And there was one trip where he came home early and he was like, "Hey, I'm home early. Would you be able to pick me up from the airport?" And I, of course, operating under the assumption that he would be home like 2 days later, had plans, for myself with a self-care evening. I was, it wasn't like I had major plans with other people or I wasn't going to a party, but I had plans. And all of a sudden, when I received that request, I felt just completely constricted inside because, and I can tell today in hindsight that I was up against my own needs and desires, and my own needs and desires were butting up against that request. Vice versa, the request was butting up against my own needs and desires. Right. And what I recognized was that there was this impulse to say yes, this impulse to say, "Of course, I'll pick you up from the airport," because, and again, what I discovered even deeper is that impulse was driven by a desire to avoid creating suffering, to avoid inconveniencing my husband, to avoid disappointing him. And we do that so frequently, but there's this assumption that we're making that by saying no is going to create suffering, is going to create an inconvenience or a disappointment. And even if it does, that is on the other person. That's their responsibility to hold and to work through. It's not our responsibility to manage our partner's disappointment or feelings of being inconvenienced. So, in that situation, were I to say yes, I'm trying to control my partner's feelings instead of, like you were saying, just taking care of what's on my side of the street, which is actually, I have plans. I would absolutely love to pick you up from the airport. I'm so happy you're home early and I'm booked. Can you find another way home? And letting him handle whatever emotional fallout that comes up for him. Right. And it's so frequently, and exactly what you said, it's so covert. It's so under the surface, and we often don't even recognize that we're doing it. And because, again, our motivations from what we understand at whatever level we're operating from is that we're just trying to help. We're trying to make life easier for the other person. But in the end, what we're doing is we're sacrificing our own needs and our own desires, and we're not making life any easier for ourselves. In fact, making it much harder.
Okay, so how can a person then realize that they are doing this and shift away from that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, it takes practice. And one of the mantras that I have, and I encourage the audience to adopt this, is that love is a practice. There's no getting it right. There's no getting it wrong. There's no failure. There's no success. It's just practice. And the best that we can do is be present to the moment and show up in our best self for that moment. So how do we do that? Just like love is a practice, I work with my clients on developing mindfulness. So mindfulness is the state of being aware of our thoughts, our emotions, our sensory input, basically our state of being aware of what's happening for us on the exterior, being internally aware of that. There's a beautiful analogy that one of my teachers, Dan Harris, talks about, and it's a waterfall. So if your waterfall, this beautiful waterfall, are your constant stream of thoughts or your emotions or your sensory input, that's the waterfall. Now imagine that there's like a cave behind the waterfall, and you're standing inside of the cave and you're looking out on that waterfall. That's the state of being that we call mindfulness, where Internally, as I mentioned, you're looking at that, you're looking from the outside in to all of those things that are happening upstairs. So you asked, how do we circumvent, how do we kind of pause that, the impulse to people please, to control and manipulate the situation, and in service of feeling better ourselves. So we practice mindfulness. We practice mindfulness through a number of different techniques. Meditation is just one of those many techniques, not always accessible to everybody. But through mindfulness, we can begin to slow the process down. So we begin to slow down the distance or the time between the impulse and the urge to fix a situation, to jump in and say yes when we may not really mean yes, to slow that reaction time down so that we have this sacred pause and we can actually inquire within, does that actually feel good? Does it actually align with my needs and my desires? Do I actually have this time, this space, this energy available to offer?
Right.
And, and mindfulness is, it's like going to the gym. We don't expect to go to the gym and do 30 squats and come out with a Kardashian booty. We have to go in repetition and consistency. And mindfulness is just the same. It is at the very most basic, in my perception, attention training. We're training our attention to our inner workings, to our inner activity, our inner voice, so that again, we can create that sacred pause and make more aligned choices, more loving choices, both for ourselves and for our partner.
Wow, that's amazing. Excuse me. Speaking of our partners, what would you say, because I know you coach women in relationship as well, can you just speak into that a little bit? Like, what's the most common relationship stuff coming up for women? Also for our single audience, also for our coupled audience, but for everybody moving forward, what are some tips that they can glean from your expertise here?
Goodness, where to begin, Barbara? There are so many. Well, two really powerful ones came to mind as you were asking that question. The very first one is the awareness of the dichotomy of needs, primarily the need for space and the need for closeness. All relationships have a balance of space and closeness. All humans have both needs for space and for closeness. Some people have slightly more needs for space in relationship. Other people need more closeness, more connection in relationship. And one of the pillars of adult relating that I work with, the very first one is self-awareness. And self-awareness encompasses so many things, but one of those things is our needs for space and closeness. Because if we come into relationship and we don't know what our needs are for space and closeness, chances are we're going to be partnered with somebody who has the opposite need as we do.
Always.
And so it's really important for us to, again, recognize the impulses, recognize the urge. When we have an urge to run away, or when we have an urge to like eye roll and be like, oh, I really don't even want to sit with you and listen to you right now. That's fair. That is absolutely fair. We're humans having a human experience in relationship. And it's unfair to believe that two unique individual human beings can come together in partnership and want to be together all the time, 24/7, or conversely, have completely independent, juicy lives and never come together and, engage with one another. So it's really important to know ourselves, know our needs for space and closeness, know our partner's needs for space and closeness, and get to understand the cues that we send each other when we may be butting up against that gap. The second big thing that came up for me as you were asking that question is skillful communication. And speaking of the pillars of adult relating that I work with in my work, that skillful communication is the fifth pillar. I coach so many women who ask me, he said this, what does he mean? Or, he said this and I reacted this way, but what he said was so vague, right? And the truth is that I think in many ways, we're so afraid of hurting one another, or we're so afraid of telling one another the truth, that we start speaking in colorful language, or we dance around a topic instead of just hitting the nail on the head and speaking our truth.
Right.
And you know, and if we kind of tease that out a little bit, there are sometimes at the opposite end of the spectrum where we tell our truth, but we're not saying it in a skillful way, and therefore we turn our partner off, or we inadvertently, you know, launch them into a shame spiral, or some other disconnect. And so learning skillful communication is, I mean, it is one of the most foundational things that a couple can learn together and practice together, so that, you know, when you have that eye roll energy, or when eye roll energy is a cue for a need that needs to be expressed, it's okay. You know, that we can bring up a topic in a loving and connecting way, instead of, you know, pointing fingers, or inciting blame. Skillful communication is the way that we create more intimacy, even when we are expressing a need that may, you know, be communicating the need for space, or the need for time apart. The way that we communicate has the potential of creating more connection.
I'm just fixated on eye roll energy. I
Right?
have a lot of that.
Yeah, I
Eye
know. And
roll
so do a lot
energy,
of
like,
I mean, talk about eye roll energy. Just talk to anybody who's online dating in today's day and age.
right?
I mean, it is ripe with eye roll energy. But the thing is that it's such a wonderful gift. That eye roll energy. I know it feels burdensome, and it's so like boring with, oh, right, all of that we have to deal with. But at the same time, every time we experience eye roll energy, it's a message. Just like all of our emotions, they are messengers. They are temporary, and they are gifts for us to pay attention to turn towards, to welcome in, and inquire, hey, what do you have to say to me? What are you trying to tell me? You know, that eye roll energy. Oh, great. You're trying to tell me that I'm done with online dating this week. Okay, maybe I need a break.
Right. Right. And speaking of gifts, that was a good segue. I know that you have a generous offering for our audience as we wrap up. Can you share a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of my favorite things that I work with new clients on. It's called the 4 Core Relationships for Healthy, Lasting Love. And it is a 5-part mini training, very, very mini training. And it walks anyone who is either in the process of calling in new love, or even deepening the partnership that they have. It walks them through 4 essential relationships that we need to explore, that we need to understand, so that, again, it's a little bit of this hindsight reflection, so that we can glean this information, mine the data, you know, all of our life experience, you know, even though we have emotional connection to it and sometimes emotional triggers with it, at the very end of the day, it's all about the information, the data that these relationships have offered us. So it's a reflection on 4 essential relationships that we need to understand, how we approach, how are we showing up in the world, how are we approaching love and relationships in the first place, so that we can better understand what may need to be tuned, what may need to be worked on, where we might need to have a belief upgrade, so that we can, you know, have a better experience in our next relationship, or a deeper experience in the one that we're in.
Wow, amazing. That's super generous. Thank you for that beautiful offering to our audience. And thank you for being here today, Bex.
My pleasure.
And thank you to the audience for watching yet another incredible interview. And we will see you in the next one. Bye for now.